17th of October in 1769, Don Gaspar de Portola camped by the riverside, mid the alders and the cottonwoods and roses of Castile, singing to the redwoods ran a river wild and deep. San Lorenzo, you're the river, flowing down from the mountains to the sea. By the river, Santa Cruz, you're our home and the place we want to be.
And in human history, the provision of water for agriculture, for drinking, for bathing, and for cooking has been one of the most fundamental roles of organized human society. And an interesting phenomenon in human, the great long breadth of human history is that in the areas where there was enough rainfall to support crops without irrigation, we didn't get big centralized government. But in the areas such as the Fertile Crescent between the Tigris and Euphrates, which is basically desert except for those two rivers, and therefore requires big irrigation systems in order to grow crops consistently, that's where we get centralized government, and along with it a lot of coercion and a lot of the urbanization and things like that. And what that illustrates to me is not so much where do things come from, but what's a really fundamental part of having an organized society or having enough water for all of us. Here in Santa Cruz County, this is not an idle question or a mere curiosity of history. It's a very current aspect of our lives. We expect here water to come out of the tap. And not only that, we expect it to be clean and clear and healthy for us and not very expensive. And so tonight, what we're really about is what happens when actually we discover that we're starting to hit the limits of how much water is actually available to us, and that we have to maybe change our ways, not take it for granted so much, but instead learn how to use less. And so what we're here tonight for is to learn some lessons about conservation of water. And we have two outstanding speakers who have a great deal to tell us about that we can learn from. Our first speaker tonight is Ron Duncan. Ron is the Conservation Manager and Customer Service Manager for the Soquel Creek Water District. That's our neighboring water district a bit to the east and south. Contrary to its name, the water district doesn't draw water from the creek, from Soquel Creek, but rather from groundwater. And after a number of years, they have been coping with a situation in which they have taken so much water out of the ground so rapidly for all the uses in that area, houses, schools, businesses, and so on, that the water table, the underground water, has dropped. And this is now endangered because without that high water table, the pressure of seawater from the coast is pushing inward, and some of that water is already been ruined by infiltration of salty water from the ocean. And so they have a very severe situation of needing to do more or do what they can with less. The Soquel Creek Water District is embarking on an exploration of how they could cope if they don't have that desal partnership with the city of Santa Cruz. And the district has been doing incredible pioneering work in introducing ways of cutting water use, especially when it comes to the additional water needed by added development. And Ron has been right in the center of figuring out how to do that, how to make it fair for everyone, and how to genuinely reduce water so that the aquifers can recover, and so that the district finds a way to live and inhabit that area without damaging it, and with having enough water so that when you turn the tap on, indeed, clear, clean, tasty water does continue to come out. So with that, let me introduce Ron Duncan from the Soquel Creek Water District.
Thank you for the nice introduction. I'm excited because I'm going to get a back scratch tonight. I made a bet with my wife. She's like, there's no way. I don't care how good Everett Connors is. Not more than 10 people are going to show up. And I said, I don't know, Mary Beth. These people are pretty passionate about what they do. So thank you. I'm looking forward to that tonight. We're going to talk about two programs the district has, our Conservation Plus program and our Water Demand Offset program. I kind of designed this presentation a little bit special for you. We're going to dive into the programs, but there's also going to be some high-level stuff too, kind of, I won't call it philosophy, but I think really what's at the heart of what makes our agency tick and our programs work. But before I begin, I wanted you to get a sense of who I am. That's a picture up in the upper left, circa 1978. That's me on the right. My dad's in the middle, just turned 90, went back east last week to celebrate his 90th. He's doing great. And there's my family on the right. My beautiful wife, Mary Beth, two boys. The boy on the left just graduated 6th grade. That's what we were doing there. I've been interested in water my whole life. Even as a kid going backpacking, we used to salute water. It was just our respect for water. And that's because sometimes you couldn't find it, and you're always, every time you went by it, you wanted to appreciate it. And I've practiced it and studied it my whole life too. So drought is not Soquel Creek Water District's problem. It's the aquifers have been overpumped, but collectively by all of us. So we need to think not in terms of quick fixes for drought or short-term solutions. We need to think in terms of long-term policies and programs that encourage people to alter their lifestyle, and also in businesses to make changes, and for everybody to make changes how they value and view water. There's a book I'm reading recently. It's called Making the Mindful Leader. It's by Hunter and Chaz Carlson. They say it may require a shift in perceiving possibilities in relationships. Then they go on, that adaptation requires that they, and they're talking about districts, learn to relate to the public not just as passive customers, but as partners in creating the solution. I think there's a lot there to that. I think times are changing and we need to look at things a little differently. So we've kind of taken that mantra a little bit in developing what we're calling our Conservation Plus program, and we're going to dive into that. I'm going to start a little bit big. So I'm a firm believer in creating a mission statement or whatever for your either organization or project. And consistently we go back as it's used as a touchstone when people ask us a question like, well, why can't we do this? Well, we've worked hard on our mission statement, and this is kind of like the essence of the mission statement, but I will take a second to read it to you. Save a sufficient amount of water to slow down seawater intrusion and permanently secure long-term water savings as we continue to search for supplemental water. Design the program so it produces water savings in a cost-effective manner that is fair, equitable to customers, focuses on reduction in outdoor potable water use, provides support to customers, and can be logically expanded in subsequent phases in leaving sufficient funding for potential additional supplies if needed. What I wanted to show you here, this is some work out of these guys here. This is basically out of the social media lab out of MIT. This guy Pentland on the bottom right in the citation. On the one on the left relates to America. The one on the right relates to Europe. And what it's showing is GDP, gross domestic product, on the left, on the vertical axis, and going across on the right at the bottom, you can think of it as ideas. And the blue dots are cities. And what they said, they tracked this via the internet. There's a quantitative assessment. They could see a direct relationship amongst the amount of diverse ideas coming in, different ideas to the city, and the greater the diversity of ideas, the greater the gross domestic product. Now this has been shown to be proven in organizations and even down to the team level and how they perform. I thought it was pretty powerful thing, and we use it on our team. So when we design teams to solve problems like the conservation program that we're, plus program that we're doing, we believe in this. We bring in people purposely to create the atmosphere, the platform to capture all these different ideas. It's not always the easiest, but at the end it produces the best result. And I'll add another thing that they're doing, Pentland and his crew at MIT. This is an amazing thing, and it's modifying the way we're looking at our rebates for our organization. They hid 8 balloons throughout the world, and they said whoever can find them the first will get $40,000 for all 8 balloons, or each balloon you get whatever that is, $5,000, right? And so, and they had the idea that nobody was going to be able to find them probably. Well, most people said, hey, they put out a thing on the internet and said, if you find a balloon, I'll give you $4,000, and they would keep one. That's Makes sense, right? Everybody wins. They took a different approach. They said, we will give you, not the person who finds the balloon will give a certain amount of money, but the couple people who talk to the people who found the balloon will give you a portion, a cut of the pie too. And so it was incentivizing the people to kind of get that frenzy, that talk going, that sort of thing. That's the key there. So how long do you think it took them to find the balloons? 8 balloons hidden around the world using this method. Other people didn't find them. Using this method where they incentivize the people to talk to people, and that's the key, 4 hours. Yeah, 4 hours. I tell that story because now we're looking at one of the innovative ways we're going to do rebates, potentially, and we may do a pilot program, is to not to incentivize just the person who gets the rebate, but maybe the person who talks to the person who gets the rebate. So this is the basis, and I'm a kind of a architectural guy when it comes to these things, and we are going to dive into the specifics of the program, but the Conservation Plus program is not your typical engineering program where we would design and I'm an engineer by trade and schooling and all that, so it's not to knock that, but it's, we don't have to figure out where to lay the pipe or build a structure or something like that like we have done in the past. It's a much more community-driven project. I would say innovative in the sense of we don't know exactly where it's going to go. We don't know how it's going to turn out, so we have to be very, very adaptive. That will be the key to the success of the program. So we've taken from some of the best out there in the business world. John Cotter, in his latest book, has come up with this idea of the dual operating system. And what it is you've got your typical hierarchy structure on the left. It's hard to see, but that's the boss at the top, layer of managers, and it goes on down. You can see that structure kind of on the left. That's what we have at the Water Agency. It's needed for that way. It's needed for the type of institution we are. But for the program we have, that structure doesn't work very well. It doesn't, and I'll get to the advantage of this other one. So we have adopted this structure on the right to do the Conservation Plus program. And what that is we've taken the organization and cut it this way and this way. Basically, people from anywhere around the organization can be on one of the teams. We have a communications team, a finance team, finance and legal. We have a customer support team, a water budget team, and then kind of a core team. And the trick is you don't assign people to team. You let them volunteer. And so we've got people, the person leading the water budget team is not a manager, just a supervisor, but said, I really have a passion for that. So she's leading that. Somebody else outside the conservation team. So we're not, it's a whole organization type thing. And what we're seeing is a diversity of ideas coming in. And we want to keep this structure so when we launch this, we're hearing the person out there in the field saying, hey, I'm hearing this from customers, and they'll feed it back to another team. The advantages are, there are a lot of change agents versus one in the typical structure. It's the want to, get to mindset on the right versus have to on the left where you get assigned something. You get everybody's a leader basically versus just a couple at the top. So wanted to present this. It's, I think, will be the key to the success of the program. The Conservation Plus program has 3 main elements to it, and we're going to dive into it now. It has water budgets, customer care programs, as we call it, and communications. The program in itself is $3.2 million the first year, approximately 2.3 the second, and 2.3 the third year. We're estimating $1 million a year after that for those analytical people who want to know that sort of thing. And the objective is to solve 1/3, what we think is 1/3 of our water issue. Okay, so 1/3 of the problem, which is 500 acre-feet. That's the goal of this program. Okay, so now this slide, we'll dive into a little bit of the data. I want you to not think this is all pie in the sky, high level, that sort of stuff. It's very data-driven, very data-driven. And this is just one example. I'm going to draw your eye. So how we determine where we're going to do 500 acre-feet? Where do you begin? What do you do? Do you tell everybody to reduce a certain amount of water and then you can calculate what that would be and be 500 acre-feet? Well, is that fair to the people who have already been conserving and using 20 gallons a day? We don't think so. So what we did was we looked at a bunch of stuff, and this table distills it. And you can look at the numbers in the red. That's 75 gallons per day per person. And if you go across in the top chart, you can see how many people will be exceeding that. 14% in the winter months, up to about 45% in the summer months. And then in the bottom part, it shows the acre feet saved. So from that, we know approximately how much water we'll be saving. And what we're trying to do, remember back in the mission statement, it wasn't about just save a bunch of water. It was save a certain amount of water and focus on outdoor use. So by setting a flat water budget, what we're really doing, most people in the winter months, will, as you can see, will be under their water budget. We're hoping they don't try to bounce up and hit it, right? But in the summer months, they'll be over, and this will chop those summer months outdoor water use off. That's the idea here. This is just, again, to give you an idea what the water budgets are, because everybody seems to like those. So we have single-family water budgets, multifamily, commercial, vacation, institutional, landscape. But let me just sum it up. So for residential, and that's single-family and HOAs and that sort of thing, we're giving them 75 gallons per day per person. And commercial we're not giving them a water budget, because a successful business may use more water even though it's efficient in its use relative to a restaurant or a business that's not very well attended but is very inefficient. So it's kind of tricky how to assign them water budgets. So what we did is we said, you got to meet best management practices. And you've got to install 1.28 gallon per flush toilets, shower heads, and all these other things. I could go on and on. But, and that's on the indoor, and then there's an outdoor component. You have to cap your overhead spray irrigation, and you can't water your turf. So pretty strict, but again, it goes back to the mission statement. Outdoor water use, superfluous, that sort of thing. The penalties are up there in the upper right hand. We give a little warning signal, shot over the bow if you're 10% over, and if you go more than 10% over, it starts to get pretty steep. And I'll just tell you that you will hear the ouch if you are using much water over your budget pretty quickly. And of course, for commercial, if you're even watering outdoor turf, it would be 1.5 times your water bill, monthly water bill. So we think it'll get people's attention. The idea is not to generate revenue, but we think we're in a position where we're so short water that it's either pay a price now and preserve it for the future, or pay a huge price later and maybe even lose what we have for the future. Getting to the customer programs and communication. Customer programs are things like we've got an enhanced rebate program. We're facilitating contractors, kind of pre-approval, if you will. We have a program called Water Smart. Everything's Water Smart now, huh? While there's a lot of innovation still to be made in the water conservation area, I think it's going to move more toward the behavioral side of things. And that's what this program does. So what this program does here is sends out letters to people saying, this is how much water you're using. We know how many people are in your house. We've got these algorithms, and therefore you're using more water than you should. And here's what it looks like relative to your neighbor in an efficient household. And what we've seen is about a 5% water savings from the people who received this letter versus the control group. We've been testing this for a year. 1/3 of our customers have gotten the control group. They've gotten the letter. 2/3 have not, and we've seen that savings. And here's the absolute amazing part, and we didn't realize this till last week. Our water use for the past 5 months is 20% lower than it was for the previous 5 months last year. Okay, congratulations to everybody. The people on the Water Smart program are still 5% below them. So the behavioral modifications is working. That's crazy good, So those are the kind of things we're exploring, when we talk about innovation and things like that. And we see other agencies adopting that too. Communications, this is probably the key to this thing succeeding. And here in the triangle, a lot of people, don't understand it, but we have a multi-layered approach to this, coming at customers every which way we can, from high level, stuff in the paper to very grassroots, to basically knocking on your door. We're going to meet every business owner at their place of business. We're hosting tons of events. It's a very grassroots approach. That's our thing. It's kind of a neighbor to neighbor type deal, and those are the type of ads we have are, this person down the street has replaced their lawn or done this or that, and people are recognizing them. Okay, water demand offset. This is supposed to be a bridge to supplemental supply or whatever. We've had it in vogue for 10 years. The concept is that if you're going to build a new home, you've got to save water, or business or church or school, you've got to save water somewhere else in the community. I just want to let you know that in the early days, very quantitative, in the sense that there are boxes you would check. You don't need to read the form, but for any kind of business you had, we would check, and that would show you how much we think you're going to use. And then we had another form that said, here's all the things you can do and how much credit you'll get if you do those things. So it was tracked meticulously. And so you can replace all kinds of things to get credits. And then we had, this is another community member. This is where the ideas come in. Sharon Saris came to us one day and said, I just want to talk to you about how we can improve the program. So, and let me say, the water demand offset program, we didn't create it. We stole it from San Luis Obispo, who got data from Santa Barbara, but we have become kind of the central place for it. Anyway, Sharon came to us, and so what we figured, we've been focusing on one side of the equation, just what you could do to offset your credit. We realized we created this program, what you could do to save water in the new construction that you're building. So the other side of the equation, and we made it real easy. The beautiful thing about this is when we did the math in the far right, well, the middle column, there's how much they would save in water, right? 5% up to 15% approximately. It's actually cheaper for them to go green in the new development. They save that amount of money on the other side of the equation because they don't have to do as many offsets. So it's a win-win-win, wildly popular program. This is where the program's transition to. We're about running out of fixtures. Remember that bridge wasn't supposed to last forever. Ours has lasted probably at least twice as long as any other program out there. And then since we're doing the conservation program, we realized, hey, now, if they're doing the WDO program, they're stealing from what we want them to do in the Conservation Plus program. So what's a guy to do, right? All those blue dots are measures that you can do to save water. As you go across the axis horizontally, the measures get more expensive. This is a hard concept to explain. But what we said is, we don't want anybody doing the fixtures and that sort of thing, or anything that's going to be in the Conservation Plus program, so we have to figure a new way to do it. We're going to have them pitch into a fund now, a monetary fund, and we'll apply that money to big projects. The question is, what's appropriate amount of money for them to pay per acre foot of offset or per gallon, whatever. And we use this graph, and so when you go up the x-axis, we chose $55,000. In the water demand offset program, the important thing to remember is there's 4 competing forces. There's the developer who wants to do it as cheap as possible. There's the customer who's getting these retrofits in the old days, or us, that you want to make sure they get a fair shake out of it. There's the district that has to manage the whole thing, and then there's the aquifer. And the aquifer has always been our touchstone. We do not cheat the aquifer at all costs. That's always been the thing that didn't get cheated. That is the water demand offset program in a nutshell, and it continues to morph right as we speak. I think for organizations to excel in the future, especially with the amount of the water situation, the public, this is a model that I'm hoping we can invoke. It basically reframes the question from the very beginning about your problem, uses a transformation process and a building and broadening process that is regenerative. And I won't go into it, but that's kind of where we're hoping to go. Lessons learned are times are changing. We need to adapt to them. Old ways are not sufficient. We've got to innovate, and that means whether it's hardware, software, behavioral, organizational dynamics, whatever, and probably going it solo as you have shown, it's not going to work. We need to do the community. I was walking through the Madrid airport last week, and I saw this. This is a Spanish advertisement, and it translates to "Don't go it alone." And I thought it was cool. Thank you.
He has several positions. He's head of the Southern California Watershed Alliance and a co-facilitator of the Environmental Water Caucus, and has been involved in water issues in California for a long time. And he's here. Those of us who work on desal alternatives have a special interest in Connor and his work, because we like to emphasize that alternative side of that phrase, desal alternatives. Australia tried desal plants, and they now have some closed desal plants because of cost, and instead are doing radical conservation efforts. And so this is what Connor is here to tell us about today. So let me welcome Connor.
Thank you very much. So I'm glad you're all here under me. What seems like a very warm night in Santa Cruz, but I want to talk a little bit about context before I get into Australia. And I thought we weren't going to mention that water supply whose name we weren't going to speak, so I won't focus on that. But I think the crowd actually did come for you, Ron, and I think to hear a description of a water agency that realizes that water is finite and it's a limited resources and we're going to change the way we deal with it is really encouraging. Quickly, my background, I'm just a Southern California steelhead fisherman. I ended up doing conservation programs, both where I lived in New England during the 77, 78 drought here in California. We had a rare time when it didn't rain for about 3 weeks. Our river dropped, our industry emptied our reservoirs, and we drew from what happened here and in Oregon, which really got me started on a lifeline commitment to doing conservation programs. So I've also worked for water agencies. I was in Pasadena during the 6-year drought, the 86 to 91, where I was a drought coordinator. At the end of the drought, we managed through an extensive program to save 27%. So I know it can be done. People say that conservation won't work. It's the only thing that's ever worked. And while we talk about these other supply sources, and I'm also now caught on what's called the Bay Delta Conservation Plan, which is really a big dumb canal project to take huge twin tunnels underneath the estuary and put it right at the pumps. Even by their view, that'll take 20 years. What do we do in the interim? And so this drought's really been a window on the future. It's given us an opportunity, and I'm happy to be here in Santa Cruz and Soquel because right now, Southern California, which in the past did a good job, has failed. And we're looking at statewide numbers. Just to give you some comparison as we talk about this, statewide water conservation, water usage numbers per person per day is about 174 gallons per day per person. Sounds like a lot, right? There's areas across this state which are over 300 gallons per day per person. That's not water use, that's water abuse. So the State Water Resource Control Board just came out with fines and some mandatory recommendations. They're really more than that. They're the opportunity to use what's called the reasonable use doctrine. And we can start going after those that continue to waste water. And then demand other sources of supply that have impacts on the environment and continue that cycle of overuse of water we've done for too many years. But I'm actually more interested in 77, 78, and then 86, 91 in terms of what I saw in drought response in other places. In the Central Coast, it's quite clear. You don't have another source of imported water. You have what you have locally. You have your aquifers, and when it goes dry, it goes dry. So when I was elected to the water district in Ojai, at the end of the 6-year drought, we went ahead and had farmers put meters on their wells. We don't have groundwater regulation in the state of California. Every other state in the nation does. We used to say us in Texas, but now Texas does, and we still don't. So that's being hotly discussed this summer. So I don't really think we should talk about drought. I think this should be a permanent change and reaction both to what we can recognize as climate change. But right now there's an opportunity. The other issue that's up there statewide that we've depended on for funding of a lot of these programs is a water bond. We've passed 7 of them in the past, billions of dollars. The last one that was passed in 2006 and 2009, there was big legislation that went through, and part of that was a $11.14 billion bond. It was supposed to be on the 2010 ballot. It was bumped because it showed it wouldn't pass. Then it was going to be on 2012. It was bumped again to 2014. Right now it's going to be printed. We helped write an opposition letter to it. Out of that 11.14, there's $250 million for water conservation. So it's such a big Christmas tree that gave everybody what they wanted to get support that it kind of fell over by its own weight. We're past the deadlines, but deadlines can always be extended in Sacramento. So when the legislature comes back from recess They're going to have a short period of time to come up with a 2/3 support to override that water bond with something smaller, perhaps more sensible, but perhaps not. So we're really going to have to look locally how we're going to support these programs, how water agencies are going to deal with reduced revenues, and how we're all going to use less water. So with that, as a little bit of background, then I wanted to go to a trip I was fortunate enough to make with a study group talking about both energy and water in Australia. Now, if you don't know, Australia went through 12 years of severe drought. They had massive firestorms, windstorms, dust storms, and they created a whole new philosophy of water. So they made some major changes, and some of them will not come quickly here, but they include on our water rights. We have an arcane sense of water rights. Some include these pre-1914 senior water rights, which they recently tried to change at the state board and step back from. It's very complicated. That, with not having groundwater regulation, leaves us in a very tough position. The other thing that they did is essentially, I'm not for free markets of water, and kind of a dangerous point we might reach. But the way Australia did it was very interesting in realizing if you take away people's water rights and you open up essentially who can use water and how much there was fluctuation for a short while. And then it evened out, and ag maintained its water usage in terms of what it had available to it, and then reduced it drastically. On an urban level, we saw something we'd never expect to see, and that's what I want to talk about now. Australia, the driest continent, the oldest soils, not unlike California in a lot of ways. Winter rains, dry summer, flip season because it's in the southern hemisphere. So in May we were just going into their fall and it was beginning to rain, which was nice. But a real sense of conservation ethic. As the governor declared in January his plans for a drought reaction, part of it is that people get a conservation ethic. I think that's happening here in this area. I don't think it's happening statewide, and I'm not quite sure why. But because the price of water also got so expensive in Australia, people did everything they could to get off what they called utility or grid water. Instead of cisterns, they call them tanks. And the way they greet people is, how's your tank today? Because everyone's measuring the level of the captured water. We're not talking about small 50-gallon tanks. We're talking about 1,000, 2,000, 6,000-gallon tanks. And I've got a little summary of what you're doing, so you have a comparison. You can probably let me know. But I want to say, when I left Santa Monica this morning, where I live, I turned on the radio, and there were two interesting radio comments on water, which seems to be a daily thing now. I've never seen so much media on water and so little action. But the first one was about a town called Glendora, which is east of Los Angeles. And there was a woman who had let her grass die. I hear the governor hates lawns. He'd like to see them all taken out. I've never seen also a time when so many politicians have been willing to say that. But nevertheless, this woman let her lawn die. She received a summons and a fine from her city saying that she had 60 days to change that. She contacted them. They didn't respond. She contacted the newspaper. She's on the radio. I think they're sorry that they ever said that, but typically homeowners associations and others require people to have green lawns. The other one I heard, just a little bit further in traffic, trying to get out of town, on the Pacific Coast Highway, was about Santa Cruz. And it was an interview with the conservation coordinator. It was talking about fines and going to mandatory, and how Santa Cruz, I think, is really the first place that's actually implemented and is doing that. And they talked about that and the challenges. But what was interesting is they talked about a water school. So only 6% of people in Santa Cruz aren't meeting the allocation. So congratulations to the rest of you. You're doing a great job. Let's get back to Australia. So the size and the scale of Australia, just so you know, is roughly the size of the continental United States. But there's a lot of similarities, size, climate, lifestyle, and that's why we have something to learn. The one issue that isn't on here that's really key to them is their rugby fields. So they can tear out lawns, they can put in cisterns, but they want to keep their rugby fields green, and they were able to do that as well. So this long-term millennium drought. Then they actually went, as we often do, from drought to flood. Australia is broken up into sovereign states. They actually say they report directly to the Queen. But one of the things I found refreshing, now I can add Soquel to the list, is their water managers were intelligent, and they were frank, and they were candid. Even the private water companies were coming out and talking about what they found hadn't worked and what had worked, and they were interested in moving forward. But if you go through a 12 years of severe dryness, and then when it gets so wet you don't know what to do with the water you've got, then you realize you really have to change things. They're really on the bleeding edge of climate change down there, and they accept it. So Adelaide was one of the two places where I spent more time. Rainfall is about 17 inches a year, more like Monterey than Santa Cruz. During the drought, they were down to about a quarter of that. Large population and Mediterranean climate. So it's like we were talking about here, saltwater intrusion, salinity in their groundwater. So they had to make serious changes, and they did it throughout their watershed called the Murray River. Their only alternative was to capture and reuse rainwater. Then we move on to Victoria. This is probably my favorite because we've talked about water and a per capita usage and those numbers that seem extreme. I have to say LA's happy to be at 123. Long Beach was probably our best agency because they publicly shame politicians and others that go over their allocations, and they did go mandatory as well. In Victoria, they actually dropped down to 32 gallons per day per person. So, and you know, it's basically the same lifestyle. They drink a lot of beer, but Sydney is an amazing city that is looking at a plan for 2050 to drop its energy and water levels another 50%. Sydney was really fascinating as a modern growing city. It is a small population within the city itself and a large population around in the greater metro area. Our first trip there was actually to, this is a place where I didn't understand. They've had a hard time with recycled water and fully implementing it. They still have the yuck factor. They use it for industry. They use it for cooling. We still rely on power plants on the coast that are slowly getting shut down that have used ocean water and impacted marine life by cooling it and then dumping it out hot. That's why that water supply that will not be mentioned would like to be in power plants, but that's not going to work out either. In Australia, they take their recycled water and they use it for cooling power plants. Power plants are across the western United States especially are huge users of water. So the link between energy and water is made there as well. But I'm going to show you some pictures later of what they're doing in new buildings, because we visited a new building where they're actually doing what they call sewer mining. So they've gone from this yuck factor to actually going in where the building was being constructed, tapping into the sewer and treating it on site, and that's how all the toilet flushing goes on within the building itself. So they're realizing that their resources are really limited. They're on an island continent. Maybe that helps. Queensland, Brisbane, rainfall about 19 inches, more humid, subtropical, 80 gallons per day. During the drought, they also got down to 32 gallons. It's moved up a little to about 42 gallons. Still all below the levels we thought. They have a huge amount of rainwater harvest in the area. But this conservation ethic, this idea that we're all going to save water, we're all in it together, has really changed Australia in a way that we need to change as well. So I want to talk about Santa Cruz. These are my rough numbers, but you have huge potential here with 28 to 31 inches in a that should now be the American spelling, a drought year. But 12 inches in a year like this. With 12 inches, you can still capture a lot of water. I want to mention a couple of large devices we have. There's an environmental group that website's worth looking at called Tree People in Los Angeles. They realized the value of tree canopy and even in Los Angeles and set about finding trees that could survive smog. Planted 1 million of them for the '84 Olympic and did a large education program. And then they really got into water issues. So their biggest concern is how can we look at a watershed from a household level? The water you can capture off your roof, the water you can capture on a street, and in their case, in a parking lot. So they capture 210,000 gallons underneath their parking lot, filter that water through the ground, and use it for watering for the whole year for their appropriate landscaping. They're a good example of what you can do. We have the same in the Santa Monica Library, our new green library. It captures all this water. The biggest challenge we had is that water was considered wastewater by our regional board until we convinced them that that was irrigation water and we should be able to reuse it. All right, so City of Santa Cruz is meeting your goals. Congratulations to all of you again. And the rest of the state isn't. So I think we should really get to a point where we give value to that. When I was the drought coordinator in Pasadena, we actually gave out awards. It was a little tricky to figure out how people actually saved water. We realized some of them weren't doing it on purpose. Some of them would give us funny answers like they had shorter baths. And we didn't quite understand that. But nevertheless, if their water demand had dropped over 20%, which is what is required by everybody in the state and every urban agency by the 2009 legislation, is we're all supposed to have a 20%. The way I understand it, when the governor this January said another 20%, we're talking about 40%. So that really gets us down to a whole new level, but that's really where we should be. So your gallons per day per person that we've talked about before, with your allotment, gets you down to 62.25 gallons per day per person. That's a reasonable amount. That's actually below what the state used to consider the health and safety level of 70 gallons. But I would have you challenge the state and tell them that it can be done, and it will continue to be done. When we're talking water tanks here, you can see why they don't have lawns anymore, right? So their cisterns are bigger than their cars. They're capturing a large amount of water. They're like us in that they have a dry period that goes on for, and quite hot. And this year they had, last year they had record heat. But then they have a wet period too that's intense and short. So they're now building cisterns into the ground. They're building, you see them everywhere in every scale. I think the day I enjoyed most was actually outside of Adelaide in the Barossa Valley where the vineyards were. And every vineyard was capturing all the water it could. They were from the 1850s, German farmers who brought over biodynamics, and their soil is what they considered. So during the drought, because their soil was in such good condition, they weren't impacted the way others were at all, and they continued on like that. So some of the other successes in Victoria, you don't see curbs there. What they do, especially in medians, which are impossible to water without overspray, is they take the curbs out, they lower it, and the water naturally flows into it. It seems obvious. I would like to say we do the same on a green street in front of me where I live in Santa Monica, but we put the curbs all the way around it so the water runs down and leaks off. They actually then capture and move that water underneath. So we need to come up with new innovative ideas for saving water. What we did in the 90s was a big step. I was really happy to be part of community-based organizations exchanging 1.4 million old 5 to 7 gallon toilets to what was then called ultra low flow, which is 1.6 now. As was mentioned in Soquel, you're down to 1.28, which is called a high efficiency toilet. We have waterless urinals. And we actually figured that we could do, in LA, there's 500,000, this is kind of amazing, urinals. We could actually take 450,000 of them and replace them with waterless urinals, provide jobs with janitors, because there is a maintenance process of that, and that would be equal to a large unnamed source, other supply source on the coast. So these runoff projects are in every park. They've actually changed the way public works works in a city in Australia. So it is really a watershed program. There are water bills. We've talked about a program earlier called Water Smart, which allows you to compare your water usage to your neighbors and like homes with the same lot size. But they've actually done it in a different way. And you can see the number of people and the water allotment and all the information that's on that. If I compare that to my LADWP bill in Los Angeles, it would look, you wouldn't be able to tell what your actual water usage is compared to your sewer rate and your electric rate, but this really gives you a good clear breakdown. So a large portion, and we consider this about 5% savings, is really the public outreach and the programs you use, and this was part of it. So here's another. I'm going to go back to Sydney because I was just amazed by this. We went in the city hall. Their city halls are really cultural centers. So we had the symphony warming up while we were having a discussion. You may have heard recently, politics are volatile in Australia. They've just gone backwards on their cap and trade and carbon. Ironically, some of the politics around that were around water and the huge investment they made in that unnamed water supply that failed, and 4 out of 6 sat idle. So now they have a far more conservative government that's trying to undo a lot of what they've done. But a lot of these plans that they've created aren't going to be changed. And their view of buildings are not energy and water resource demanders, but they actually provide energy and water. And I thought that was a vision to the future. We all need to set a guideline that we've never seen before. Here's another one in Queensland. A combined gray water, water capture and reuse system as well. You all know gray water is the everything but your toilet water and your kitchen drain. One of the areas in the long-term drought that really became dependent on that because it's not unlike the Central Coast is Santa Barbara. So they got emergency permits to do gray water. It's taken us almost 20 years to allow single-family residents to do gray water, but now you can. So there's a real opportunity to do that. People will do it anyway sometimes. I remember as a kid growing up, we just disconnect the discharge from our washing machine and let it run out over the berry fields. But and then when we got really advanced, we took a stocking to capture the lint so it wouldn't go over. But now we have soaps for it. There's one called Oasis that's the proper soap to use so you don't have too much phosphorus. There are opportunities to do that, but we're beginning to see systems that look at a house in a closed loop. So your water isn't being discharged and dumped back to the sewer, but you actually can do it on site. And Australia is one of the places that's looking at some innovative things, but I think California should be innovative on that as well. They also are looking at neighborhood rainwater harvests. So in terms of parks or boulevards or within a block itself or within a greater neighborhood, people are capturing and reusing that water. Again, anything to get off the grid water. And it makes it tough for the water utilities, right? But their prices got so high because of their debts, they had to do that. So here's what I think Santa Cruz is doing right. You offered rain barrels, but you sold out. You have a gray water course and a rebate. You're still doing rebates on the water toilets. I see they've come back to $100 in Southern California. I think the innovative thing we did was allow community-based organizations, and these are actually low-income neighborhoods, to actually go out and get economic development and be part of that exchange program. I would recommend that as well. I don't know what you're paying for lawn removal or turf removal. There's a little,
50 cents.
50 cents, okay, we can up you on that. LA moved up to $3, although we need it more. We should have no lawns, but it's $3 a square foot to take them out. And then Long Beach bumped up because they're competitive to $3.50. Do I hear $4? Anybody? Maybe Santa Cruz can step forward. But the value to the water agencies in the long term of taking that turf out actually pays off. It's the same as the rebates they pay. That will pay off over time. So, and the research on the managed aquifers up here. How we use water. This was mentioned by your Santa Cruz water conservation person on the radio in Southern California on public radio. We did a really good job of replacing a lot of toilets during the 90s, but those flapper valves are now worn out and there's silent leaks often. And people don't realize it. It's hard to get the right flapper valve and get it right. So there's an opportunity to replace them, get the rebate, and have a more efficient toilet. On the right, there's the modern building that captures and reuses water by sewer mining. The level of public awareness, and I think we should need to exchange information. Typically, cities and water agencies share information up in north, and we really need to do that. north and south. We need to look at large-scale and communal cisterns that we can use, including underground ones. And it's hard to imagine promoting these things while it's dry now, but it will rain. And usually when it rains after a drought, it rains very hard, and we don't want to miss those opportunities. Even a few of those late rains we had. I was at a water law conference in San Francisco, February 20th, and it rained heavily for 4 days. And those 4 days, Marin Municipal Water Districts, whose reservoirs were almost dry, they got almost 20 inches on Mount Tamalpais. Their reservoirs fully filled up. When they're filled up, like when I was head of the groundwater agency in the little town of Ojai when I was elected, the farmer said, "Why are you making us put meters on now?" I said, "You don't want to wait until the bank is empty. You want to do it when the bank is full." And as our water fills up, we have to maintain these demand reductions we have for the future. And with that, I want to say thank you all very much and open it up to questions.
Does anyone know anything about what's happening in Lompico? They just had $160,000 to pay for an intertie emergency pipe to San Lorenzo Water District, and they waived all of the environmental laws in order to do this. And now there is a 30-year tax proposed of $2 million for permanent hookup to the San Lorenzo Water District. Does anyone know anything about that?
I know a little bit about it. The Lompico district was a very tenuous water system, and as I understand, the people there and the people in the larger San Lorenzo Valley Water District are all feeling fairly good about having accomplished the merger, and they support the additional cost because they're going to get better water security. But they had a system that was falling apart already, and with the drought, it just became nearly worthless.
And is there any issue around waiving the environmental costs?
As I understood, there was an emergency declared, which then allows that kind of thing to happen. But the San Lorenzo Valley Water District is actually one of the strictest around here about following environmental stewardship, because they live in the valley which collects their water, the watershed around the river, and they're very aware of their limitations. So I have some trust of that board that they do the right thing.
So on a lighter note, my in-laws had a cabin on a lake in Wisconsin. There was rain, but they had a tenuous septic system, and the well was not particularly reliable, and all of us would arrive for the same weekend. And so the sign that went up in all over the place was "Save water, bathe with a friend." And even the smallest children when noticing that things were a little out of kilter would just say, "Save water, bathe with a friend." It was just that got to be this joke in the family. And I think sometimes keeping it light helps.
Assuming that the rain that falls is a common good that's shared by all, or could or should be shared by all, I'm wondering if we should be thinking about or looking into the future at a time when the human populations will have all these awesome rainwater catchment systems and ways to bring water into the household, and there will potentially be some competition with all the rainwater systems to replenish groundwater being a key part of replenishing natural streams. And what about the water for the creatures in the riparian habitat, the fish that need that water? So seeing this human use of water versus water for creatures and animals in the natural system, is there going to be some kind of balancing act or choices that we have to make around that?
Is 80% goes to agriculture. The other 20% is split between urban usages, municipal industrial uses. But then we have the water for the environment, and how do we count that? And probably the biggest missing link we do in California is that we don't apply any of the water we save back to the environment. And the one case where we did is the Mono Lake decision, which actually allowed 30% of the water we saved with those community groups, while we had fun riding bicycles from DWP and returning water for those community groups in Mono Lake, 366 miles back. And while that water comes, that's one of the only places I know in the state where water is returned directly to the environment. The other thing where that public trust doctrine that came up there has just been applied to groundwater in the Scotts River, and then that can be applied otherwise. The other issue that I mentioned is what's called reasonable use. So the Constitution of California, there's someone, Secretary Patton was here earlier, but there's attorneys that know more about this than I do. But the way it works is you have the right to use water, but not the right to abuse water. And so you can lose your right to use that water if you don't use it properly. But you're right, we have to calculate. I think we have a long ways to go. That we get to that point that the runoff is reduced to that level. And especially in urban areas, what we're also trying to prevent is that first quarter inch, or what they call the first flush, which contains most of the pollution. So by reducing that first flow, we can, but at the same time, we need to maintain the flows in the rivers. Because what's happening right now is we're overtaking water out of the Bay Delta. We're overtaking about 5 times more water is allocated than the state actually has. So those flows need to be challenged. And it shouldn't be on a river by river, stream by stream basis. It should be statewide law, and so I was working on that. That's an excellent point.
Thank you. I comment on those of us working on trying to restore habitat quality in the San Lorenzo River and its watershed. I've been working on the idea of a water budget for the whole watershed, which is that there's a certain amount of water coming into the basin, which is the San Lorenzo Valley, basically, in the mountains, from rainfall and from fog. And there's a certain amount flowing out through the streams, and then a lot of it flows out through us, through our plumbing systems and our sewage systems. And what we're trying to do is assess what would be the budget, the allowable amount of water for people, but it's got to take into account how much do the bugs and the birds and the fish and the trees do too. Otherwise, it's not actually a serious budget. So this is it's a very apt question. I think the drought sometimes makes us feel like we're in an extreme situation, it's an emergency, and we get a little short-sighted about it. But the real lesson, and I think the lessons we're learning from both of these speakers, is the long run is really what's the most important thing. And it's got to count the birds and the bugs and the trees.
Well, I'd just like to thank Connor and Ron again for helping us learn today, and keep up your good work. Also wanted to acknowledge Matilda Rand and Annie Newman, who are our camera operators tonight, who will be, we hope to have this on community television sometime soon. Thank you all again for coming tonight. This has been a great event. I hope you've learned as much as I have, and stay tuned. Water is going to stay with us, and we'll stay with you. Thank you very much.
In December 1955, when the rains came pouring down, you carried all that water and you poured it over our town. Then the engineers the very next year, they put you in a channel. Our river once so wild and free felt like an enemy. San Lorenzo, you're the river, flowing down from the mountains to the sea. By the river, Santa Cruz, you're our home and the place we want to be. In our vision for the future, there's a river running clear, where the salmon and the steelhead raise their young ones every year. With the alders and the cottonwoods and roses of Castile, we shall all be dancing on the brink of the world. Here we go. San Lorenzo, you're the river, flowing down from the mountains to the sea.